Does thinking about food leave you feeling more guilty than grateful? For a lot of Christian women, food carries more guilt, more confusion, and a heavier burden than any other part of their health journey. So, today we're going to look at how to fuel our bodies faithfully without diet culture, without food legalism, and without outsourcing our health stewardship to anyone else. So we are on the fourth of our four pillars of health stewardship. So far, we have talked about renewing our minds, and we've learned how to calm our bodies when overwhelm hits. And then we looked at tackling the paralysis that can come from learning about environmental toxins. So, to help us in walking through these four pillars and growing in our health stewardship without overwhelm, I've created the More Than Self Care guided journal with lots of practical steps that we can take in our stewardship journeys. Be sure and catch the link to that in the description down below. Now, let's get into the nutrition pillar. We're going to start from a place of gratitude because food is a gift from God. It is not a moral scoreboard. I found that the church often lands on one of two extremes when it comes to food. One would be more from a place of legalism, teaching or acting as if you have to eat a certain way in order to be spiritually disciplined. The other extreme is probably more common, using grace as an excuse to eat whatever without any regard to the impact some foods may be having on our health. I would say both of these miss the mark. Let's look at 1 Corinthians 10:31. I got it right here in my Bible, where Paul tells us, whether then you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. And I find this very interesting. It does get to whatever. Pretty much all aspects of our life is part of our worship. But Paul explicitly mentions eating and drinking. Nourishing your body is an act of worship. Food is our fuel for the mission that God has given us, right? We are called to be the hands and feet of Christ in the world. And these physical bodies are basically our vehicle to do that in. We want to be fueling them well. Looking at food through the lens of stewardship rather than either of these extremes of either restriction or indulgence, I think that changes our relationship with food. The world encourages us to outsource our health and our health choices to somebody else, maybe the government, and looking to the government to regulate it, especially when it comes to food, but a lot of other things regards to our health too. Looking to a doctor to prescribe us an answer, or even looking to social media and finding an influencer who has a hack for that. There can be wisdom in good medical advice and in sensible government policy, but nobody can really steward your body for you. That's your stewardship. God put you in charge of your temple that he gave you to be the hands and feet of Christ in. Now, do you remember the Bereans in Acts chapter 17? When Paul came to them teaching them about Jesus, they tested everything he taught them against Scripture. And I believe that this applies, this action of testing everything that we are taught to make sure that it is true. I think that applies beyond just Bible teaching. It applies to food and the things that we're told about food. It applies to studies and news stories that we hear about, to food guidelines, whether they be from the government or from some other organization. Because this is something we need to understand. Not every study is neutral. Not every guideline acknowledges God's design for his creation. So we need to pay attention. We need to ask questions and filter all of these things through what we know to be true about God, his character, and his design for this world that he made and for the bodies that he made for us to live in. So let's look at the simplicity of nutrition. I've got just 3 things here to consider about food. And the first one is just to eat the real food that God made. We can build our meals around the foods that your great grandparents would recognize. Examples of this would be, meat that comes from what I like to call happy animals, happy cows that got to live, out on pastures eating grass the way God made them to live. Wild caught fish that got to live out in the ocean or in the lake where God designed them to live, eating the foods that God designed for them to eat. Okay, traditional fats that humans have eaten for centuries, like butter and tallow, bone broths, eggs, properly prepared grains. I could go on. There are many, many of these traditional foods that healthy cultures have eaten for centuries. Skip the highly processed lab-made foods, also known as ultra-processed foods, which sadly is most of the foods in the grocery store aisles. Eliminating or extremely reducing how much ultra-processed foods you're eating. That is the common denominator in so many of these different diets that we hear about that people are having success with. They're eating some variation of real food, and the common denominator is that they're not eating these ultra processed foods. So this is key. Eliminate these, because if the ingredient label reads like a chemistry experiment, your body's not going to know what to do with that. You don't need a complicated plan. All right, we want to keep it simple. Just eat real nutrient dense foods, and keep following me because I'll be talking about that and what exactly that looks like. Number 2 is to listen to your body's current season using good discernment. I'm going to give an example here. We're going to pretend that we're at a birthday party. And of course, it's a birthday party, so they are serving cake. You have a choice. Are you going to eat the cake, or are you going to decline the cake? We want to look through a stewardship lens and not the legalism lens. The legalism lens would tell you that it would be doing a bad thing. You would be a failure if you eat the cake. But if you are a healthy person, I know everybody defines it a different way, but generally you're not dealing with chronic symptoms or chronic condition. You don't have any sensitivities, allergic reactions to things in the cake, like the wheat or the sugar or the oils or what have you. Okay, so eat the cake. Enjoy the gift, celebrate the birthday. It's not a big deal, because if, considering in the context that you are generally eating a nutrient dense diet, and that your next meal is going to have more of this good nutrient dense food. This one piece of birthday cake is not going to make or break you, and that it's going to be fine. Now, but here's a caveat. If you are in a healing mode, say that you've had surgery or you're recovering from being ill, okay, or you do have a chronic illness or a chronic condition, you do have sensitivities, and if I eat this cake because of the sugar, because of the wheat, because of the whatever, my body's going to be in a tailspin for the next 3 days. Skipping that cake, that's not legalism, that's wisdom. Okay, so it's discernment, and so it's nuanced, whether or not, so we don't want to be looking and judging the other person that chose to eat the cake or the person that chose not to eat the cake. We can trust each other that we're using good wisdom to steward our bodies to the best of our abilities based on what we know about our bodies and the season that we are in right now. Eat the cake, don't eat the cake. That's a matter of discernment. Okay, now this third point is super, super simple, and I will not belabor it so much. You need to hydrate generously. All right, so we know that our bodies run on water, so that should be our main beverage. And it can be helpful to add in a pinch of mineral-rich salts or some trace minerals, because that helps your body be able to better absorb and utilize the water. Okay, so clean water, well used, is one of the simplest acts of stewardship. So drink water. So remember the More Than Self-Care guided journal to help us walk through these 4 pillars of health stewardship with super simple practical steps to help us apply it in each of our unique daily lives. You can find that link down below. Thanks for being part of this series and for following along. And remember, biblical health stewardship is doing your best within God's provision and what we know and understand about God and his wonderful creation. And then we got to trust him with the rest. Your body is a temple. He's given you grace and provision to steward it well, one small step at a time. And we can trust him with all the rest. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.